We start from a simple but also quite transformative idea that stewardship and care is economic infrastructure and a business model. If we can pay for roads and power lines because it keeps society functioning, we can and must pay for ecological care.
Welcome back to Tending the Tides. I'm Caitlin Rich.
And I'm John Bonkoski. Today, we're pivoting our focus. We've spent a lot of time talking about the how-to and the why of growing food in the ocean, but today is really about how we value that work within our regional food system.
That's right, and we're going to hear a conversation that John and I had with Cheryl Chen, the founder of Salmon Returns.
As you'll hear from Cheryl, we actually go way back. We worked together for over a decade here at EcoTrust.
And now she's working to build a new model around a financial product known as a credit. Most folks will have heard of a carbon credit, and with Cheryl we discussed the idea of a stewardship credit. A stewardship credit is the same thing, except instead of focusing on sequestering carbon, a stewardship credit focuses on continuous acts of care.
She brings this transformative idea that care isn't just a volunteer effort. It's actually economic infrastructure. Last November, Cheryl presented her work and these ideas at the Oregon Coast Mariculture Future Forum to a room full of mariculture growers, agency folks, and scientists. Her presentation captured the room's attention. Everyone there started to see how we could tend to an ecosystem's needs while funding that work beyond simply producing a commodity.
We're going to dig into her model and see how Oregon can lead the way. One thing to note is that the concept of stewardship credits are complex and abstract. If these ideas are new to you, some of this information might be hard to absorb all at once. We'll do our best to talk through these concepts and terminology as they come up. And there will be resources provided in the show notes, so you can dig into it at your own leisure. All right, let's get into it.
My name's Cheryl Chen. I'm a first-generation Taiwanese American. I grew up in the Bay Area of California, but am living here now in Portland, Oregon. I have to say, coming on this show feels a bit like coming home because I basically grew up career-wise at EcoTrust. John, you and I worked together for a decade plus side by side to empower coastal communities. But yeah, so after EcoTrust, I found myself actually moving more and more into finance work, mainly because I learned that philanthropy is only 3 to 5% of global capital. And that all this time in the NGO space, we really weren't tapping into that other 95% of capital. And there's a lot of folks that I've met who want to move their money to support good work on the ground, but just don't have enough pathways or visibility into moving that money. And so that just kind of blew my mind coming from the NGO space. And most of our time is writing grants, and that's been the limiting factor. And so that really led me to create Salmon Returns with my co-founder, Donna Morton. We started Salmon Returns in the middle of 2024, and we're a financial intermediary, which is really just a fancy term to mean that we help bridge the gap between communities doing the important work of regenerating land and waters and biodiversity with the immense financial capital out there that needs to be routed towards that work. We start from a simple but also quite transformative idea that stewardship and care is economic infrastructure and a business model. If we can pay for roads and power lines because it keeps society functioning, we can and must pay for ecological care, because it's essential to the health of our economies and, of course, to life itself. So that's the premise of Salmon Returns.
Thanks so much for sharing a bit about your background, Cheryl. So to kick us off, let's start with the basics. Can you explain what is a biocultural credit?
Yeah, so a biocultural credit is a type of stewardship credit. And so stewardship credits are a verified unit of stewardship that has maintained or improved an ecosystem, such as a watershed or a forest ecosystem or a coastal system. And so then a biocultural credit, which is a type of stewardship credit, but it's one that also emphasizes the value of the cultural relationships and knowledge And so really stewardship credits are a pathway to pay for the essential work of keeping the ecosystem alive, not just extracting products from it.
A lot of folks have heard of carbon credits. How are biocultural credits different?
So we've learned a lot from the carbon credit market about what works and what doesn't work. And so the difference between the two is carbon really focuses on one metric. A ton of carbon is their unit, which can create backward incentives. Like in an extreme example, if the goal is just to capture carbon, then someone could plant a monocrop of non-native trees somewhere, which would be catastrophic for an ecosystem. And so biocultural and stewardship credits inherently recognize that nature is complex and interconnected. It really values the practice of stewardship and regeneration, not just a single metric. And unlike carbon credits, they aren't offsets, so they aren't permission to do harm elsewhere. You can really think of stewardship credits as payment for the delivery of ecological services that are necessary for overall public and economic health.
Another difference between carbon credits and biocultural credits is a shift from additionality-based rewards, where you only get paid if you do something new, to practice-based stewardship. Can you tell us more about the difference between additionality and practice-based stewardship?
Yeah, this is such a good question, and really what I think sets apart stewardship credits. So, additionality essentially asks what change compared to a baseline, meaning you have to prove your actions caused a discrete, measurable, and permanent change. And in an ecological system, for example, a living ocean, that can be like trying to count the exact number of waves you personally cause across the whole sea. There's tides, there's storms, there's currents. So isolating an actor's perfect before and after impact is really unrealistic. It's an impossible task, actually. And so when we design systems around that, we can end up spending more time and money on modeling and monitoring than on the stewardship itself. And we can unintentionally push people to focus on stewardship projects that are the easiest to measure instead of what actually matters most for ecosystem health. And so that's why we emphasize practice-based stewardship credit programs. And importantly, practice-based credit programs doesn't mean there's no measurement. We just don't make stewardship depend on an impossible attribution problem. It rewards verified practices and we track outcomes to see how these stewardship practices are playing out in the ecosystem.
Why is it so important to reward ongoing stewardship rather than just incremental change?
Carbon markets often pay only if you can prove that measurable specific change, kind of like only paying doctors when there's a sick patient and their health improves. But ecosystems need preventative care. You want to pay for the practices that keep the system from getting sick in the first place. And so that ongoing care is needed and needs to be valued and supported.
To dig deeper into practice-based stewardship, what are some of the key indicators that you look for? We've heard you talk about biodiversity as measurable return of life. Does that include measuring over time a variety of species, improvements in water clarity, or something else?
Yeah, so it's essentially tracking whether an area is becoming more biologically rich and functional over time. So for mariculture, one wouldn't rely on a single metric. You would use a set of indicators and compare before and after and inside the mariculture area versus nearby reference sites because the ocean is naturally variable. These set of indicators could be species diversity and abundance. Are we seeing more kinds of fish and invertebrates? And are key species showing up more consistently in the area? Another big one is recruitment and nursery function. Are juveniles and new settlers increasing in the area? Folks can also look at habitat function and structure. So like seaweed lines or shellfish gear can add three-dimensional habitat, right? And then depending on your site, you can also include water quality proxies, clarity and turbidity, potentially dissolved oxygen, nutrient load. because those tell us if the ecosystem conditions are trending healthier. And at the end of the day, it's really up to the community to decide on what metrics matter the most and are key indicators and are practical to measure. And so this is really where local or community-based research or university partners can come in and partner up because they really can add that capacity and monitoring expertise and also start to create a longitudinal base of looking at over the long term, how is mariculture supporting ecosystem integrity.
How does a model like the salmon returns ensure that capital actually flows back to the indigenous stewards and local growers doing the actual work, rather than getting stuck in administrative layers?
Yeah, this is a really important part. And really, it starts with flipping the usual order. So it's about governance first and finance second. And so ideally, there's a community governed entity. These are often led by the local producers or stewards. And this is the group that administers the credit program. And this entity sets the rules of the game. So, like, what does good stewardship mean in this place? What gets measured? Who gets paid? And how benefits are shared. And then folks build the credit around that governance. So it's transparent up front where the money goes, to whom, on what schedule, for what work. So, in other words, the stewardship contract is written to route dollars to the people doing the care, whether it's local growers or indigenous stewards. It's really helping communities rebuild decision-making power over shared infrastructure. Like in this case, it's ecological infrastructure and shared capital flows. I really believe this is at the core of how we grow community power and be able to more and more self-determine their future and build a future economy on the terms of community.
Okay, so we've learned about what a stewardship credit is, why it's important, and how a community might approach starting their own stewardship credit program. We're essentially creating a financial product that allows money to flow to people doing the caretaking of an ecosystem, and it should be designed by those people and for them. But can you tell us more about how seaweed or shellfish farming provide the underwater infrastructure for a healthier ecosystem?
Yeah, I've been really loving redefining this word infrastructure. We're so used to thinking of infrastructure as like roads and bridges, but in coastal systems, the real infrastructure is living, right? It's kelp forests, shellfish beds, seagrass meadows, because those are the things that hold habitat together. They serve as nursery grounds, they keep water conditions stable, and they support the food web. And mariculture can mimic some of those functions. Seaweed lines can add structure and habitat. Shellfish can filter water and influence clarity. Seaweed growth can pull in nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen into its biomass, which can prevent harmful algal blooms. And the point is that every farm isn't automatically going to restore nature. It's that with the right design, mariculture can be a managed piece of living infrastructure, and that the stewardship is the practice of keeping that infrastructure healthy over time.
And for an oyster grower listening in, how might these credits change their model? Is there a competitive advantage in selling an ecological outcome alongside a food product?
Yeah, totally. So credits essentially create a second product. It's a verified ecological service that can diversify revenue, support the better practices, and attract buyers who want traceable stewardship. As a producer, when kelp or shellfish prices drop, your costs don't drop with them. Credits help because they can help pay for the part of the job that never stops, which is the ongoing skilled stewardship that keeps the farm and the surrounding ecosystem healthy, whether or not you're harvesting. It's really about the business resilience because you have a product revenue plus stewardship revenue. And the cost of that stewardship isn't passed on to the consumer, potentially pricing you out of a market. It's paid for through a different mechanism that recognizes the overall public health it's providing.
We're jumping in here to provide a bit more context around how credits provide a second revenue stream, because the buyer of credits might include more than an individual consumer. If we shift our thinking on what is infrastructure and include mariculture and the ecosystem, we get back to this idea of ecosystem services that Dr. Sarah Hamilton, Tom Calvanese, and many others we've interviewed on this podcast have pointed out. So just as an example, kelp forests help protect the coastline from storms and erosion, while also providing oxygen and critical habitat for fishes and many marine organisms. Our coastal communities need these things to live and thrive. Buyers of stewardship credits are ones paying into the system and ultimately providing income to those performing the stewardship activities. Buyers could range from individual consumers like you and me, to cities or states, to large corporations or philanthropic initiatives. One of the things you said during your presentation at the Mariculture Future Forum was you encouraged us to think about Oregon as becoming a global example for what this might look like. And I guess I'm curious what you think makes Oregon, our coastline, our communities, particularly well-suited for something like a stewardship credit.
John, you and I have spent a lot of years walking the docks and along the port communities of Oregon. There's a strong coastal identity here, a dedicated community of producers, university partners, Sea Grant, state and county agencies, associations, co-ops, NGOs. I could just go on. We've worked with all of those folks for years. You have a great mix of people who are already used to working with each other. And thus you have this convening power, this institutional capacity to design and run a credible pilot. I really feel like the community fabric is already there. And that's huge. I think there's this fierce love of place on the Oregon coast. When people care, they mobilize. So yeah, I feel like Oregon could really lead in a global example of what this could look like. And I will say too, this is really why I started Salmon Returns during my time at EcoTrust. We lived and breathed the power of community. We bore witness to it every day. And it's really the flow of financial capital that is a limiting factor. And we really got to help get it unstuck.
So I think policymakers can probably help support this work to get the capital unstuck and start flowing. And so for the policymakers who are listening, you've talked about a marine ecosystem services credit working group. Could you share why this would make meaningful change on the Oregon coast and maybe what we need to do to make this real now?
Yeah, a working group is how it can move from a great idea to something real and scalable. And so if it were me, it can do a few very practical things. First, it would, define the credit categories. What exactly are we paying for on the Oregon coast? Habitat function, biodiversity support, water quality benefits, resilience, those kinds of services, and just really defining what those are and what the needs are on the coast. And second is, what's the set of right-sized monitoring and verification standards? Something that's rigorous enough to demonstrate integrity, but not so expensive that it eats up the whole credit value. And third is I would establish governance and benefit sharing norms so that's transparent, who administers the program, where the money goes, if there's extra money from the credit, where that goes and how decisions are made around that. And yeah, ensuring that local producers and indigenous communities and all sorts of different stakeholders that are in it with everyone else that are centered in decision making and benefits, that it's truly a community led process. And then I would do the market making work, identify buyers, be it the public, maybe it's a state or a county agency, philanthropic, like a foundation, or private, major donors or something like that, and clarify why they should pay or why would they want to pay and what benefits they get in terms of attribution or getting to be part of the story of this credit program. On the policy side, really important, it can really help set targets and incentives. For example, a state or county can set goals for coastal ecosystem function and incentives for businesses to participate in a credit program. So that demand isn't purely voluntary and it starts to really become just a standard part of doing business. Policy is going to be really key in moving this towards the new business as usual model. But yeah, from this working group, pick 1, 2 pilots, define clear success metrics. And so within 12 months of the pilot operating, you then have a credible demonstration that Oregon can scale. Yeah, I think it's possible. I know that Oregon can do it.
I absolutely love that conversation with Cheryl. It is incredibly inspiring to hear her map out exactly why the Oregon coast is the perfect place to build a stewardship credit. We have something special here, a deeply rooted coastal identity backed by a powerful network. We have active sovereign tribes, a dedicated community of producers, world-class university partners, including an excellent Sea Grant program, state and county agencies, industry associations, co-ops, and committed NGOs. The entire ecosystem is ready to serve as the network to lift a model like this off the ground.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, an important step that we're focused on here at EcoTrust is building the connective tissue that helps mobilize these innovations and capital. Over our history, we've found success with building networks of trusted relationships that bridge the gap between state-level strategy and local agency. By centering those relationships and connections, we transform isolated efforts into a cohesive participatory ecosystem, shifting the focus from natural resource extraction to a resilient triple bottom line economy.
And beyond those relationships, I'm also still thinking about Cheryl's description of mariculture as underwater infrastructure. That is such a powerful framing. If we begin to view kelp forests and shellfish beds as essential natural infrastructure, things we collectively invest in because society depends on them, it completely flips the script. It fundamentally changes the entire business model for a grower, from merely selling a product to anchoring an ecosystem.
I love that framing too, and I think part of the reason it's so powerful is because we all know what it's like right now to exist in an extractive, commodity-based economy. And there's a lot of energy to start shifting towards a reparative economy.
And Cheryl's model uses the term regenerative economy, but I'm hearing you say reparative. Why those words?
Yeah, so I think regenerative and reparative are similar terms. But a reparative economy is going to be one that acknowledges the extraction and the harm caused in our current paradigm. And by acknowledging that, we know that it's going to take effort to repair our ecosystems. And I think that should signal to all of us that the return on investment, or the ROI, for a stewardship credit is going to be having cleaner water and inviting back biodiversity into these places that are so out of balance.
Right, and Cheryl mentioned that for any pilot project, it'd be important to secure buyers. I want to dive into that a little more. What do you think would motivate a buyer to purchase a credit, and how credits can help us shift our perspective on an ROI here? And I guess what I'm thinking about is my own kind of personal journey around this idea. You know, as a human living on this planet, I very much have an interest in perpetuating and improving ecosystems so that future generations can live and thrive here. I have children, and I very much want to leave them and their kids something better than what we have. So to me, investing money in outcomes that result in perpetuating life, things like clean air, clean water, so that this planet will persist, is very much worth it. And I want to create ways of measuring that and showing what an expanded ROI means.
Right. That's why it's important that we invest in repair now, and how it sets us up for future returns both ecologically and monetarily. So I find this idea of repair really powerful. And one of the ways we're working towards repair at EcoTrust is by capitalizing a reparative loan fund, which we're calling the Upwell Community Capital Fund. While we're still fundraising and designing, the fund's purpose is to lend to EcoTrust's community partners out there doing the work of repair, whether it be in our forests, our oceans and rivers, or on land. Another key aspect of the repair work is ensuring that those who have been historically denied access to capital and resources are not only prioritized, but that the fund is designed to meet their needs as a reparative action.
That's really cool. And I love that EcoTrust is doing that work. Cheryl emphasized governance first, finance second, where the community informs and leads the design of a credit program before capital flows. Upwell uses a reparative lending model. So beyond funding others to do repair work, what are some of the reparative practices of the fund?
Yeah, like Cheryl outlined in the model for developing stewardship credits, we'll also start our design process with talking to communities and projects that we're hoping to serve and lend to. We want to understand their current barriers to accessing capital, like loans, and then rethink and remove those barriers. So an example of this, we've heard from partners on the East Coast that it's difficult to collateralize loans to oyster farmers because the resale of oyster farming equipment is nil. And actually, this is true in most cases, as repossession of collateral when a loan isn't repaid doesn't result in those lost funds. So instead, what if we collateralize a loan to an oyster farmer based on their continuous acts of care and stewardship of the ecosystem they farm in? One way we could do this would be selling stewardship credits on their behalf to investors, community members, and philanthropic partners who are motivated by reparative economics and paying for our natural infrastructure to reach that collateral requirement. Or we could simply get rid of that requirement too.
Yeah, I love that. I think we have to be willing to rethink what has value. Is it financial returns and wealth hoarding, or is it the health and wealth of people in place, which really are at the center, I think, of thriving communities? It occurs to me that this question is really the central debate of our time. Capitalism, as it's practiced currently, relies heavily on an endless number of externalities that we can no longer ignore. We have to pay for the world we want, and it's really up to us to create the infrastructure, the human, natural, physical infrastructure to transform our economy to be more just and equitable and hopefully result in greater health and wealth for people in place. So I've loved this conversation. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Cheryl, for all the great thoughts. I want to continue this, and I'm excited to share more with our listeners. If you want to go deeper and continue your learning about the information we've discussed, you can find Cheryl's full presentation from the Future Forum in our show notes. You can learn more about Salmon Returns by visiting their website, salmonreturns.com. Until next time, keep on tending the tides. This episode was hosted and written by John Bonkowski and Caitlin Rich. Edited by Susie O'Neill with production support from Megan Fouch, Emily Chen, and Tyson Racer. Music by Imagine Nostalgia, Boxwood Orchestra, and Our Many Stars. Illustrations by Tony Sterling and design by Eldai De La Cruz. This podcast was made possible by our funders at Builders Vision Philanthropy. Builders Vision invests in and collaborates with nonprofits, businesses, and others working towards sustainable solutions to societal and environmental challenges. Finally, this podcast is a production from EcoTrust, where we work in partnership at the intersection of equity, economy, and environment. Learn more at ecotrust.org.